So to better understand our food supply issues and whatnot, we've invited Charlie Rankin from Yanasa Ranch TV from YouTube. Good morning to you, sir. Praise God, I'm well and alive, and that counts. How are you? Pretty well. There you go.
Hanging in there.
We're glad you're here. Thank you for your time. These stories are very odd, and I think there's a lot of speculation and rumors about what these stories mean. Like, for instance, let's talk about the cows dying in Kansas. I mean, thousands and thousands of cows all of a sudden die of heat exhaustion. I hear it can happen. It's a thing, but to see whole herds huddled together, keeled over, is that normal? Is that a thing? Is that really a thing?
I don't think that the situation in Kansas is normal for just heat conditions. I think there had to be some sort of other factor in there, whether it was environmental or intentional. There's really no way of telling. I was reading Pointer, the fact-checking nonprofit that owns PolitiFacts, and they had put out an article saying that what happened was the temperatures rise so quickly that the cows couldn't adjust to it. That's completely unheard of. If anything, the temperatures were high for an extended period of time. The humidity was high, and that would have impacted some of the cattle. But for large groups of the cattle to die off is a bit unheard of. And the other thing is that this heat wave was pretty widespread. The humidity was pretty widespread. And yet a majority of these deaths occurred within a certain geographical range, which tells you that there had to be some other factor in there that either messed with their nerves or something happened in that particular area.
I mean, they were huddled together, right? So it was like a big mass, and they found them all dead. So when this happened, was this at in the pens that were preparing for the slaughter? I mean, like at what stage of their life were they in when they found them dead?
Well, most of these cows died in feedlots, and feedlots do have a heat island because they have no ground cover, which increases the heat. They have a lot of bodies in one area. But the thing about feedlots is that you would have had to have really mismanagement of multiple feedlots in order for that number of animals to die, because they do have ways of cooling the animals down. And I'm saying that I don't even like feedlots. A lot of, when we buy our beef, we buy it from local farms. It's all grass finished, but or we have our own. But the reality is that even, with my feelings about feedlots, I can say that they do have protocols in place to deal with these situations. But the cows out on pasture with an adequate water source wouldn't have been affected at all. So most of the deaths that we're hearing about did occur in feedlots. But the other thing is that feedlots are often a target for what we call monkey wrenchers, who are not animal welfare groups, but animal rights organizations. Sometimes there are a few people out there who take things to the extreme, and they don't think that cows are a species that belong here because they feel like we have bred them ourselves. So they go through some extreme measures. I mean, that could be something tied to it. But there's also, back in 2020 or 2019, Kansas lawmakers were pulled into a meeting with the Department of Homeland Security in regards to what they thought was a terrorism threat to agriculture. So there are a lot of different possibilities, different theories that could have happened to those cows. But I think that the point is that just them being in that environment and so many dying, the simplest answer of, well, it was a heat wave, just I'm not buying it, because it doesn't add up to what actually happened out there.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Mr. Rankin, because I remember in the early 2000s, I had visited a farm out in Fresno in California, and there was pretty high heat during that summer. It was, well around 100 degrees. And I do recall seeing a couple of the cows die. This was at a like a milk processing plant, or they were milking the cows there. And there was a little heat island, as you mentioned, but only 5 or 6 cows died, and the majority of them were fine. So it does seem a little bit alarming to hear the story of so many of those animals dying. It's very, very surprising.
Well, there are millions of cows in Kansas, but like I said before, what I think is suspicious about it is that it happened within a particular geographical range. Yeah, there were probably a few cows here and there throughout Kansas and throughout other states that died from heat, but the majority of where these mass deaths occurred. That's a little strange. It wouldn't normally happen that way. If it were just the heat, it would have happened in a much wider range. And where we live, we have temperatures that get above 100 all the time, and we have very high humidity. And they do fine. In fact, it was 100 degrees yesterday, and our bull was taking down fences and doing whatever he does.
Bulls are pesky, man.
Yeah,
they're a bunch of trouble. I do find it interesting, because again, all we're left is with speculation, and oftentimes with stories like this, we'll never know. I mean, it's not like we're ever going to get like an official report or like, and if someone discovered, oh, in fact, it wasn't heat exhaustion, it was X, Y, or Z, it was an insurance fraud or something like that. No, they're never going to tell us. We're never going to know. All we are left with is heat exhaustion and our pure speculation.
yeah, and I, even with the insurance fraud thing, I don't think it was that either. I think that those cows were more valuable to the feedlots than what the insurance is going to pay out. But and again, it happened at multiple feedlots just within a geographical area. But there was something you just said that triggered a thought, and it just blanked my mind.
Well, just not knowing and being left with the speculation of it at all. Because I mean, I've seen opinions both ways where I've seen people say, listen, it's totally shady to see all of these cows feet up, it's so quick like that, as you say, in a very specific concentrated area. And then I've seen other people say, listen, cows do die of heat exhaustion. It happens. What would you say is the average number of lost cattle per year due to heat exhaustion? If you had to guess, ballpark it.
I mean, I'm sure it's in the thousands, just not all at once,
Right.
Living on a farm and raising animals, I can say that you see a lot of instant death, but like I said, it's not all at once. Animals and just like apparently there's an adult instant death syndrome now that's growing with humans. It happens, but it's unusual when it happens to an extreme or at an elevated level. When we question these things, a lot of people jump to conclusions.
Hold that thought. Apparently, the greatest owner, the largest landmass farmland owner in America is Bill Gates. That's bizarre to me, but I wonder what Charlie has to say. Charlie, why would Bill Gates be the largest farmland owner in America?
Well, I think, with we've seen what's happening with all of the food commodities. The prices are going, and Bill Gates is an investor. So you see the price of food going up. You see food shortages. I read it. This is another one from Pointer. I love pointing out Pointer's faults because they're the fact-checking agency. But they mentioned the other day how our grain and our production was the same as it has been for the last 10 years. The problem is that our use ratios have gone up. We haven't been able to grow. We haven't been able to increase our yields. We've actually decreased our yields. So from that perspective, I think Bill Gates is in many ways diversifying his portfolio, but he also is in his own way, whether we agree with it or not, trying to constantly develop ways that he thinks is going to save the world or change the world the way he wants it. And so if you look at his investment portfolio, he's actually pretty deep in agriculture. He's got everything from, we talk about how animals are necessary for the environment, and now they want to remove them to save the climate. So he actually has a company that recreates the microbials that animals would create on the soil so that you can put these synthetic microbials out there, and apparently it will have the same impact, which it actually won't. You can't solve that solution without animals. But he has a lot of different things, but he's also investing in, as we know, alternative meats. I think, when it comes to our food supply, there's actually a very small majority of people who control the entire food supply. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and those who control it actually have more control over us than we may think, especially when you start applying all these different sciences to add certain things to the food, GMOs and things like that. So to me, it's a bit scary that he's getting that large into the agricultural industry, because I don't necessarily trust somebody who has vocally expressed his concerns about population. But the reality is it is a very large industry, and there are very few players at the top of that pool. When you go to the grocery store, you're actually buying from 7 large conglomerates. You're not buying all those different brands you see on the shelves are coming from, mostly 7 large companies. And so we don't actually have that much say over what we're putting in our bodies anymore.
Yeah, it's very concerning. And you couple that with all of the health issues that have been rising since we've truly started to manipulate our food supply with hormones and other issues. It becomes very, very troubling. Bill Gates owns 242,000 acres across 18 states, but apparently the folks in the Dakotas are pushing back. They feel like he's violating some of their corporate farming laws there. So it'd be interesting to see what happens. But I think
he's also been buying it kind of covertly. They don't buy it directly through, and the numbers you're hearing don't even include what the Gates Foundation owns through some of their sub corporations. So that is a little bit fishy as well. I mean, I understand not wanting people to know you're Bill Gates coming to buy some land, because then the price will go up. But at the same time, this has been going on for quite some time with shell companies, and it's a little bigger than what you can imagine when you include what their foundation actually owns through nonprofits as well.
But one of my questions has always been, well, then is it possible, given that's the trend and they're buying everything up that they possibly can, and they're corporatizing every single aspect of the supply chain, are mom and pop farms going to be a part of our future, or are they dying out?
Well, they've been dying out for some time. I mean, it's nearly impossible for a farmer to get a cow processed, which is how they have to make money to raise the animals and then be able to sell it. So the small farmers have been cut off, probably going back to, if you look at the New Deal, they've been cut off from the marketplace, and they've been struggling to get back into it. We have farmers markets now and other ways of doing things, but the fact is that competing with the grocery stores and competing with these corporate entities who are able to, pull grains in from third world countries and make very cheap food products, it's very hard for the small farmer to compete. They're depending on people to buy from them, because it's, in my opinion, the right thing to do. I mean, you have a choice when you buy from a local farmer. You don't have a choice when you're buying from a grocery store.
I've been told that if I wanted to start a cattle ranch or some sort of a 100-acre homestead that included animals and crops, I would need at least $1 million in the great state of Texas to do that. I mean, that seems like a bridge so far away. We're talking about 100 acres, not 242,000 acres that Bill Gates owns, but just 100 acres. My grandparents had a 100-acre farm up in Indiana, and I loathe the day they sold it and bought an RV and traveled the country. It just seems like it's so far away now that families who are trying to move away from busy city life and get something back to subsistence living or homesteading, which is a trend these days, it seems like it's not very possible given our circumstances. But I want to switch a little bit and talk about the actual food supply chain issues we have. Well, last time we talked about some of the issues related to fertilizer, the grains coming out of the Ukraine and Russia, those issues. But it's with all these food supply problems, there are more and more people talking about how there is a major food crisis on the horizon. We may not suffer as bad here as, say, Africa, but what say you, Charlie Rankin?
I think that we will suffer a lot more than people are thinking. We actually already have. If you look at how much food prices have gone up since 2019, back in 2019, I felt that we would see the price index go up close to 400% by the time we were out of this food crisis, which would be years from now. And we've already seen the UN food price index go up over 100% since that time frame. And it wasn't all within the past year. Back in 2019, it was up 20%. And as that compounds every year, it just makes the situation worse and worse and worse. People aren't going to be able to afford the nutritional quality that they need here in the United States. And that's going to be the crisis that we face, is the decrease in food quality that people are able to afford and put on the table for their family. But it's definitely, because we're a globally connected society, we're facing those challenges just like everybody else. And because the United States has moved most of its production of goods overseas, we're more of a service-oriented industry. As inflation continues to increase, I did an interview with Peter Schiff a while back, and he explained how the U.S. consumer is just going to be priced out of their own food because the food's going to be shipped to whoever's going to pay the higher price for it. And right now, China and some of these other countries are the producers. They're going to be the ones that benefit from global inflation.
So is the answer to stock up, to sort of store up food, hoard food, as some might characterize it, or is it to begin to get to know your local farmers and ranchers?
I would say it's a bit of both, because if you're able to put food in a freezer now, knowing that the price of food continues to climb, that's kind of like putting money in the bank for yourself. You're saving a lot of money by buying what you know is going to go up in the future and storing it now. But supporting your local producers is also extremely important, because as we get further along in this, the more investment that they have coming into them, the more investment they actually put back into the community that you live in. So that helps your entire community, but it also helps ensure that you have a local source of food security, and that local source is staying strong enough to grow with the changing times. Because I think that it will get tighter, especially globally, and they're not a part of that global system. So they're always going to be that local resource for you.
We're down to just about a minute or so with Charlie Rankin from Yanasa TV on YouTube. Can you just give us an update on these food processing plants and fires? Has that trend kept going? I mean, it seems like it's record high already. Are they still suffering?
Well, it's funny because when you do a quick search, you'll still find some. But it's not just food processing plants. You've had a lot of things happening with the bird flu this year. If you were to look at the entire food system as a whole, it's faced an unusual amount of hurdles that it's had to go through. And now you have these mass cattle deaths. So, but there are still fires going on at plants and random things like fertilizer trains going off the tracks. So these oddities keep happening. And I think that they're happening at a time when, like I said, our stocks to use ratios were already getting so tight. It's a lot easier for the system to get derailed when you're not growing enough to have a stockpile.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be I don't want to put on a tinfoil hat here, but at the same time, there is so much going on these days that it's hard not to pay attention to, like I said, 10,000 cattle, I guess, or whatever the number was, massive amount of cattle dying arbitrarily. And then, of course, the record number of food processing plants that are suffering from fires and other things, food shortages that are increasing. Pray, fast, do penance, but be prudent, wise, and store up your food and provide for your family. Charlie Rankin from Yanasa TV. God bless you, my friend. Thank you for your time today. We're very grateful to you.
Thank you.
Go to Yanasa TV on YouTube to check them out. That's YANASA, Yanasa TV. Great channel, great content. Hey, on the top of the hour, if you can join us, we're going to have Tito Edwards from BigPulpit.com to talk about those rumors surrounding Pope Francis. Are they true? Are they not? What's his health?